All right. Okay. So this week, so what's funny, I just got to make a quick observation so that I can show my teachers that I totally I'm with them on this. This is when you get to the minor prophets, sometimes it feels like a bit of a grind as far as some of the themes repeat a lot. I'm looking at what my Amos, I don't know what your scriptures look like in Amos, but it sure does seem like since Isaiah, the amount of markings and notations in my margins has slowly gotten smaller and smaller. So,
I actually wrote my dissertation on Amos.
oh,
So
sure you did. Let's do
I'm
this.
just
How many dissertations did you write?
Yeah, according to you, man.
one.
I feel like you've written
It's
12 different dissertations for that one master's program that you were in.
it's like the coat of many colors. It just keeps.
It just depends on which one he needs to pull out the expert tone
right.
in his voice.
Which one am I gonna polish and put on the shelf right now?
That's right. Guess how many times I've read it? not since getting my degree.
All right, not reading Amos. In case anybody was translating what Mason just said, he's read Amos. He hasn't read his dissertation since he wrote it. That's what he was saying.
That's right.
All right. Well,
I'm interested to see where Amos fit into your dissertation on the early 20th century Latter-day Saint youth development.
That's right.
Yeah, specifically masculinity. Right?
Yeah. All right. So
here's the other observation. There's only one lesson in the seminary manual for Amos and Obadiah combined. So seminary teachers trying to pull a week out of this content. You're gonna have to maybe lean a little bit heavier on the Come Follow Me curriculum and heavily on your doctrine mastery, but there's not a lot in the seminary manual.
Yeah, so if you're looking for material, you're going to have to look outside of your typical. I will say this though, in conversations with some of my teachers, as we're looking towards the end of the year and we're approaching the time to do the assessment, especially with some of the different. I gave a couple options to my teachers. A week like this would be perfect if you wanted to do the assessment, because you could do doctrinal mastery, Amos, and then you can do assessment. Like this could be a really good week, depending on your class, because your class you may want to
or an opportunity to do a review and then send them home with some type of review for the weekend and do it next week or something.
Yeah. This is a good time to see that there's some flexibility because the curriculum is not aligned with Come Follow Me. So whatever you feel like your class needs, if you want to save some time in December because you feel like it gets kind of heavy in that time frame, and you may want to even look towards New Testament, maybe move the assessment up when you have a lighter week. This may be a week that you want to do that. So this is a kind of a pacing strategy moment. So go ahead and consider that. All right. Well, so Amos, just as a really quick kind of content and context here, he's a bit of a contemporary maybe with Hosea. He's definitely during the time of Israel as a kingdom still. So maybe we can't place them right next to each other, but maybe in similar time
8th century, right? Yeah. 8th century, somewhere right in there.
I mean,
and it's not just Israel as a kingdom. It's not just Israel as a kingdom. It's Israel thriving as a kingdom by a lot of measures, right? Economically, really strong. It's kind of we're starting to see a pride cycle right here, and that's going to be a good frame to think about the context for what Amos is responding to.
Are we looking at Jeroboam the second?
Yeah,
he's the king. He's expanded the empire. Bethel, where a lot of these prophecies take place, is kind of like this is where Jeroboam's, like, that's where his temple is, and so that's kind of like the site. And so Amos, Judean, he's a Judah.
Yep, he's from Judah.
crosses the border to prophesy against Israel. And
yeah, this is the case of a Judahite going up to Israel to prophesy to them, right? Mason,
and he's not just calling out the kingdom of Israel. The first chapter, he really kind of works around the area. And so there are all these other, we think about kingdoms as these really huge structures, and nation states is kind of how we have it in our mind. These are provincial kingdoms. Okay. It's not that big. And so he's not just going to call out Israel, which is the other main kingdom of the covenant, but there are all these other peoples like the Ammonites and so forth that are kind of loosely tied in somehow with the history of the covenant there. And so he's going to call all of them out in these first two chapters. But he does it in a really interesting way. He kind of works his way around and then hones in on the kingdom of Israel.
Kind of almost like a target. Starts out outside circle, inside circle, and then boom, we're going to hit Israel in the middle.
Yeah. So with that in mind, without this becoming historical in nature as we look at Amos, where's the relevance going to be for our students as we look at some of the things that he says? So are you seeing things kind of pop out? I'm looking at chapter 2, verses 4 and 6 are really interesting. After chapter 1, he really lays into some of these other city kingdoms. And then he gets to kind of the nitty gritty in chapter 2 and 3. And I kind of like how he approaches this. He says, "Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Judah, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment." It's almost like he's like, 3 strikes, you only get 1 more, right? And he gives them the 3. You despise the law, you keep not my commandments, and their lies cause them to err, which I think is a really interesting third sin for Judah. And then for Israel, same thing. He's like, you got 3 transgressions, and 4, I will not turn away punishment. They sold the righteous for silver, the poor for a pair of shoes. And then in verse 7, and turn aside the way of the meek. And he kind of lays out their sins for them. So relevancy for teenagers. I mean, where would you go with something like that? If you were going to try to teach Amos in context, like where would you go with this?
I had 2 thoughts about this. One, I thought about President Hinckley, that story of President Hinckley when they're rededicating the Mesa Temple, and he's asked why there's not a cross on the building, and he says, well, the symbol of our faith is the lives of our members, and I love how he holds everybody accountable, but nobody more so than Judah and Israel, right? And not just those groups, but the most privileged of those groups. That's really where he's not talking to all the people. He's really talking to, especially in chapter 2, he's really talking to the wealthy, the elites of that, and how they're grinding upon the faces of the poor. And I think the relevancy there for us is that we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard as disciples of Jesus Christ and as members of the church. And that we sometimes get these instances where like something will happen, like a member of the church will commit a crime or something like that. And in the news article, it will make note, this was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we feel like we've been targeted or whatever. But this is, when you say the lives of our members are the symbol of our faith, that's a 2-edged sword. And that means that we're willing to be held accountable publicly for the covenants that we make. And I think that there's some relevancy there in just the way our students are interacting with others throughout the day. A lot of them are going to be in the minority in terms of going to school with people who are, members of the church, and there's going to be a lot of justification for them to look around and say, well, everybody's kind of doing it, whatever it is there. And then to really kind of have an elevated view we're supposed to be different.
Yeah.
And not just different in the things that we don't do, but the things that we actually actively engage in and do, to bless people, to lift people. The rich have always gotten rich on the backs of the poor. That's just like the story of humanity.
Right.
So it's not just don't do that. It's lift the poor, care for, create God's kingdom. Right. And that's what the Lord expects out of his people. And so I think helping to shift our students' gaze from saying, it's not just that we don't do these things. The Lord actually expects us to live the Sermon on the Mount, to go out and bless people and actually be active force for good.
It's a principle of Zion. I don't think it's a mistake that it says that there shall be no poor among them, right? Yeah. It kind of made me think, we had conversations this past week about the For Strength of Youth pamphlet. And hearing some teachers grapple with the idea, actually, really, did you kind of feel it when we were having that conversation? Some teachers are mourning the fact that it's not a set of guidelines. It's not a set of like things, like some teachers, and maybe we're feeling that, where we're like, oh man, they took away, the teeth, like it took away what we could be using to kind of keep our youth.
Took away our weapon is what they took away. They took away the weapon.
That's right.
That's right. And here we have, I think your point of we are supposed to be at a higher standard. It's the For Strength of Youth is not don't have a tattoo. The For Strength of Youth is your body is sacred, and that's a higher standard. And so I think.
And if all that means is don't have a tattoo, then you completely miss the point, right? And if we start and end the conversation with tattoos, then we're missing so much more about what we can learn about how sacred our bodies are, and how much our bodies can be vehicles to bring us to Christ.
Yeah.
And so it really is, Amos is trying to reframe, I think, how Israel sees itself. Yeah. And so I think that's one place of relevance there.
I can't remember who said the quote. I think it was probably Elder Uchtdorf who said something to the effect, kind of framing what President Hinckley had said, that he kind of hopes for the day when our youth are known for not what they can't do, but that they are known for their discipleship to Christ. Am I getting that right? That quote? I'm pretty sure it was Elder Uchtdorf that said that. And I think this would be a good, I guess what I'm saying is this may be a really interesting time to bring in For Strength of Youth if you haven't had an opportunity to do that as a teacher. So that's my thought on that. Yeah. All right, where do we go next? Ryan, what were you going to say?
Well, my relevance for me, and it's in the role of prophets, but maybe not the way that we think with Amos, because I know we got the doctor mastery part of it, the role that prophets play that, but I really liked Amos 7, where it's talking about, so the story goes, Amos is there in Bethel, he's prophesying actively against Israel, and there's this character Amaziah, who is a priest in Bethel, who is sent, he's kind of Jeroboam's representative. And he criticizes, he's criticizing Amos, and he says, verse 10, Amos hath conspired against thee in the midst of the house of Israel. The land is not able to bear all his words. For Amos saith, Jeroboam shall die by the sword, and Israel shall surely be led captive. Also Amaziah said unto Amos, O thou seer, go, flee thee away into the land of Judah, and there eat bread and prophesy there. Basically, look at how prosperous we are. Look at how well we're doing. We don't need you, a Judahite, to come and tell us and prophesy to us that we're going to be destroyed, right? And then Amos's answer is kind of fascinating about the role of prophets. His answer is, I was no prophet. Like there's a different way that ancient Israel considered prophets, almost like it was a profession. All right, if you go back to like Kings and Elijah, where he saves all of these prophets, like it's almost like it's a profession. The school,
like a mini tribe almost.
Yeah, the phrase that we get from School of the Prophets kind of comes from this master disciple kind of dichotomy that existed in where you'd have these really wise people, and they would have a school of the prophets, which was raising up people to be prophets, but not necessarily God's messengers to the people. And but Amos is not of that profession. Amos is, he says, I'm a herdsman. I harvest date trees, the sycamore fruit. Like I was living my best life as a farmer. So the Lord took me as I followed the flock, and it was the Lord that said unto me, go prophesy to my people Israel. So now I'm going to tell you, hear thou the word of the Lord. Don't thou sayest, prophesy not against Israel, and drop not thy word against the house of Isaac. But the Lord is telling me, thy wife shall be a harlot in the city, thy sons and thy daughters shall fall. He's like, I don't have any choice, but when the Lord speaks to me, I need to respond. And I think that's really relevant for our youth today to recognize that those 15 men that we sustain as prophets, seers, and revelators aren't doing this because they want to. They do it because they love God. They do it because they've responded to a call. But like, if you read any of their biographies, the last thing on their mind was, yeah, I think I'm going to be an apostle.
Yeah, let me climb the church ladder.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you read like President Kimball, and you know, he had like this 2.5 week, almost like a month long, like emotional spiritual journey of just trying to come to terms with, how is it possible that this humble farmer from Safford, Arizona is now going to be a special witness of Christ to all the world. And he goes through this angst to really come to terms with the idea that, yeah, this is God that's calling me to do this. This isn't anything that we strive for. And
yeah, how many of us would volunteer to give some sort of an address that millions of people are going to watch, and half of them are going to destroy you? Like they're going to attack you personally to do that. I actually, with that same line, by the way, I just need to point out, Mason just did a B-reel and he took a picture of us, but
I was resisting the distraction.
but on that same line, if you go back a couple verses in chapter 7, this is a really easy, as far as if I'm going to teach this role of prophets, and maybe I would connect this to Amos 3:7 still, but if you look at 7, 8, and 9, the Lord gives a really great object lesson. And he shows, it says, behold, the Lord stood upon a wall made by a plumb line, with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord said unto me, Amos, what seest thou? A plumb line. And he said, and then said the Lord, behold, I will set a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. That's a really interesting object lesson.
You probably ought to explain what a plumb line. You probably ought to explain what a plumb line is.
Well, a plumb line is when you're building a wall, especially anciently, you're going to have different tools to make sure that your wall is plumb. I'm going to just use that word, straight, exact, that the dimensions are what they need to be so that it can be an effective structure, whatever you're building. I am curious, is he calling Amos the plumb line? Is he calling himself, is the Lord himself the plumb line? I mean, he does then go into the calling of a prophet. So I almost see there where he's saying, you are going to be this plumb line. You're going to be able to measure with exactness where Israel is in its, in all of its doings. That's pretty relevant. You look at President Nelson as our plumb line. He's the one giving us this like measurement of, here's what you need to be doing right now to become whatever effective thing the Lord is trying to build. In this case, his kingdom, Zion, Israel. He's the plumb line.
Have you ever? It's not. I think. Are you good? Can I interrupt?
Good. Yeah.
Okay. It's not just prophets operating in a vacuum. It's prophets operating in a living context, right? There's a reason, and maybe it's not just teach prophets. Maybe teach living prophets. You think about. Because I think it's not just the prophet acting as the plumb line. It's, you think about President Nelson during the pandemic, okay, where there's all this commotion, all these opinions about about everything. I mean, everybody became an internet expert overnight, and
so much internal contention over it.
Yeah, we're just gonna demonize everybody that disagreed with their expertise, so President Nelson, who actually is an expert in the medical field,
an actual plumb line,
right? He gives us a straight measure from as masterfully as could be. He's been prepared his whole life to be the prophet during this global event. He gives us a straight measure in the context of what's going on in the world. And it was really interesting to see how people responded to that.
And you know what was also interesting about that was they were only seeing it in terms of the pandemic, of a mask, of a vaccination, of social distancing. And that's not what he said at all. If you go back and look at all of the messages that came out during that time, it's we need to keep temples open. We need to get temples open. And if this is how we do it to keep temples open, this is what we're going to do to keep temples open. Right. It was never anything about, good global citizen, but a good global citizen to keep temples open. Like it was almost Wilford Woodruff with the end of polygamy. We're not doing this just because our people getting locked up and thrown in prison. We're doing this to keep temples open. The work of salvation is more important than any discomfort or any kind of hesitation. And it's,
well, if I were to continue with this metaphor just a little longer, anybody who's done construction, you can take initial plumb line measurements, but if you do not continually remeasure and realign yourself with what you're doing, you try to eyeball the rest of the project without having to come back in and remeasure yourself and make sure you're good. Anybody who's ever done construction has seen what it looks like when somebody builds something just like eyeballing it, right? President Nelson is not just, hey, here's the plumb line, now go ahead and keep going. He should be somebody that we're looking to constantly and consistently to measure ourselves. You talk about not in a vacuum. We live in a world where we're constantly having these forces move against us. And if we just think we're going to eyeball it from what we think we've heard him say once, we're going to be this type of a wall. And we need to be constantly, let's measure it. Okay, let's build it out. Now let's stop. Let's measure it again. Let's see where our plumb line is. Like, this is a constant living structure that we're doing, and we have to rely on the flow of living prophets.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think you could absolutely teach. You could spend a couple days there. We maybe spend too much time sometimes on prophets in our lessons, right? It's like every other lesson, it's like, and the Lord calls prophets. This actually is a really good time where we have Amos 3:7, and then this case study that we've given you a couple ways to draw it out, and then you can send them into general conference, right? You can get them to teach you about President Nelson's ministry, about how it's impacted them, how it's caused them to change. I mean, this is something that they're very much aware of, and he's been very focused on the youth. Yeah. And so this does not have to be a talk at the youth and tell them to pay attention to the old guys. Right?
This is a good time for them to understand what it is, these measurings that we're getting, and then have them identify them in our most recent conference and then teach each other. I think this would be a really great active learning experience. And then Obadiah small, so good luck with that. Is that how we summarize Obadiah?
Yeah, I would. Obadiah. It starts off focused on. There's this group called the Edomites. They're descendants from Esau, so they're technically Abrahamic, right? Abrahamic family. And during the siege of Babylon, where the Babylonians come and destroy, instead of helping out Judah, they just go off and really start kind of picking off all the low-hanging fruit and plundering and just acting terribly. And so they're getting called out for it. And then it kind of goes from there to call out the rest of the world that the world's going to be held accountable for the evil that's being committed, but that eventually the Lord blesses. I mean, his goal is the immortality and eternal life of man, right? So it's the judgment is never the end of the story, I guess, is
Right.
the point there in Obadiah. It's in all of these minor prophets, it never ends with, and you're all terrible and you're all going to die, ha ha. You know what I mean? It's always the Lord, as a just being, needs to despise certain behaviors and certain ways of treating people. He has to. If you love somebody, love also requires you to hate the injury that happens. But he never ends there, right? It's always his ability to reconcile and to heal, and that's also how Obadiah is.
Yeah. All right, very good.
There's just kind of this cool way to think about our relationship with the rest of the world, and it is interesting, this history of Israel with Edom. That so this is Jacob and Esau. This, start with that story, and how does that conflict resolve itself, and then it's Jacob after he returns from living with Laban and getting his wives, and Esau and his armies, and how that kind of resolves itself. And then there's
Nice.
in the book of Numbers, as the children of Israel are traveling to the land to the land of Canaan, and Edom is up there looking. I mean, I'm fairly certain if I'm they're the ones that try to hire the prophet to curse the children of Israel, and Balaam's not able to do it, and so they got to resolve that issue, and it's just over and over and over again. It's brother versus brother, just kind of picking on each other, and it is intended to represent kind of how we see the world treating each other today. Can we just get past the idea of nationalism and see each other, that you are also children of Abraham, you are also children of God? There's a deeper relationship there than just the nation that we occupy.
Yeah, and President Nelson, get rid of contention out of your lives, right? Don't let any of these things filter that cycle of violence, right? That here we see lasting generations going back and forth. We see that in the Book of Mormon, but we see it interrupted one real explicit time. Two. One of them was when Jesus comes, but the other one is where the anti-Nephi Lehis lay down their weapons and refuse to participate in that framework of me versus you anymore. They're done with it. And I think, and then Mormon holds that up as the ultimate example of discipleship in Mormon 7. And so I think that's a fantastic way to incorporate the Book of Edom, or the Book of Obadiah. Think about these relationships, these ways that we dehumanize others, or we think of ourselves as other, right? And how that's passed down from generation to generation, how Christ is calling us to interrupt that.
Yeah. No, I get. Okay. Go forth.